Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Moon hatching. Mother? Calm approached the queen, walking down the hall. Mother, there's something I want to speak to you about. What is it, Cat? My brother. She stiffened and looked quickly away from him. Cat, I know he's not my full brother, but I don't care. Cat, it's not the way dragons do things. I am queen. I never should have. Not with another dragon, and certainly not with a different source. Mother, you were grieving and in pain. I don't blame you for finding some comfort. He held her hand tightly. You're my mother, and he is my brother. You are family, but we can't leave him in his egg forever. Please, tell me the source he needs to hatch. The queen looked down to the floor, then sighed. Moon. Moon? Yes, the father is of the moon primal. So a full moon's light will hatch him, Callum said, thinking for a moment. That's only a day away. Are you sure about this? I am. I don't care if he's half moon and half sky. He's my brother. He smiled, holding her hands. We can take him to the Nexus, just to ensure he hatches safely. Mother, we can get ready. If we can get ready now, Cad, I cannot travel to the human territories, she told him kindly. My place is here, at the spire, and I cannot abandon my duties as queen. Disheartened by her words, the prince bit his lip as he thought, What if I go? Cadamondus, you can't be serious. Please, Mother, if I need any help, I can ask Jane. She's a master of the moon primal, and I'll bring Rayla with me. It's just, I think it's time. We deserve to be a family. Together. Sighing deeply, the dragoness nodded. Very well. Take him to the moon nexus. Smiling, he kissed her cheek. Thank you. I'll find Rayla and leave at once, he exclaimed. Then he stepped back. Does he have a name yet? Adamantius. I will call him Adamantius for you, he promised, then hurried to find his fiancée, who was standing in front of the palace. Rayla, he called, running down to join her. She turned around from addressing the palace guards. Rayla, my brother, he's a moon dragon. Well, moon and sky. But my mother has given me permission to hatch him. Callum, that's great news, she smiled, waving the men away. There's a full moon tomorrow. Yes, and to make sure he's safe, I'm taking him to the Nexus. I want you to come with me. Of course, Cal. If we leave now, we can make it before nightfall, but we need to hurry. He grinned happily at her and pulled her towards the palace. Come on, let's go. Whoa, hold on, crazy lizard. she called, pulling him to a stop before kissing his cheek. While you get your brother, I'll go pack some supplies. All right, meet you back here when you're done. She nodded and ran off to their chambers to pack a bag. Callum, meanwhile, excitedly ran off to his brother's locked room. He took the key from around his neck and unlocked the door, making sure to close it behind him. Before him was a large glowing egg, primarily blue, speckled with shards of color. Some violet swirled through the shell's surface as well. With a broad smile, he stood before the egg, gently brushing the surface with his hand. Come on, brother. Time to hatch, he whispered, then pulled the bag off his shoulder and placed it on the floor. Gently, as if the egg would break at the slightest movement, he picked it up. He held back a laugh when he felt the creature inside move a bit. Yeah, I'm here. It's your big brother, he chuckled, placing it gently in the bag and putting some moss from the floor around it for padding. All right, you sit still and I'll get you to the Nexus, he told it as he picked up the bag and put it on his back and walked around to find Rayla. She was waiting where they had parted with a small bag of supplies under her arm. Ready? Ready, but you're going to have some very precious cargo, Rayla, he chuckled, putting the bag down again and opening it up to show her the egg. She gasped in amazement at the sight of it. I've never seen a dragon egg before, she whispered, kneeling down and holding her hand out to touch it, but then stopped and pulled away. Callum smiled. You can touch it. It's not as fragile as you might think. But it's a royal egg. And you are a royal guard, and my fiancé. So here. He carefully took her hand and placed it on top of the egg for her. She blinked as she touched the shell and smiled. It's warm. Yeah, he chuckled, squeezing her hand. It'll be even warmer once he hatched. So you take Zim. Zim? Well, that's his name. Well, technically it's Adamansius, but I think Zim is much cuter. He laughed. I mean, I have Callum, Cadamus, Cal, and Cad as names. I think my brother needs a nickname too. The elf only chuckles. Yeah, I suppose. After closing and securing the bag, he carefully pulled it over her shoulders. You ready to go? Whenever you are, she replied, hand on her hip. Taking her out to the Sky Nexus, the dragon backed away, closing his eyes and mentally reciting the incantation to transform. Callum became a large, majestic beast, a smile on his muzzle, and crouched down so she could mount easier. Climb on. Nodding, she climbed onto his back, grasping at his long, luxurious mane. She placed the egg in her lap and supplies under her arm. All right, let's head off, he exclaimed, making a running start before leaping into the sky and flying west. While he normally flew slightly reckless with flips, tricks, and loops, he kept to straight flying with such precious cargo. Every now and then he'd hear a roar as another dragon spotted them, but he didn't have time to speak with them today. He just roared back to acknowledge them and carried on. Rayla kept her head down as the wind battered against them, holding his fur and the egg tighter. Cal, do you think we should fly lower? She asked as the wind blasted against her. It's a bit cold up here. The air currents up here are making my flight a lot easier, Callum said over his shoulder. Why, is something wrong? He questioned, genuinely concerned. Nothing's wrong with me. I was just worried that Zim might be too cold. Don't worry, your body is keeping him warm. He chuckled. All right, you're the dragon expert. He nodded, then went back to flying, looking on ahead and looking down over the ground below. We should be at the Nexus just before sunset. Great! The rest of the flight was pretty much silent, apart from Callum greeting the other dragons. He began to fly lower as the sun set, Right on time, they arrived at the Nexus, and the prince landed as elegantly as he could, which wasn't very at the moment. And he turned to look at Rayla. You both okay back there? Yeah, the elf groaned, sitting up straight. But you should practice your landings. Crouching down, the dragon spread his wings out to the side. I know, it's still a work in progress. I haven't really done much flying. Shaking her head with a smile, Rayla placed the supply bag by his wing and pushed it down, letting it slide down the wing's membrane. With the egg on her back once more, she followed suit, her feet perfectly landing on the ground. You know, it may be the child in me, but that's always super fun, she chuckled. Callum laughed, then shifted into his hybrid form. At the same time, Jane came walking down the path towards them, bowing formally. Your Majesty, it's good to see you again, and in your draconic form, no less. He nodded back. Yes, it's been a while since we last met, Jane. I can now fully control my shifting abilities, in all forms. That's wonderful news, and it is good to see you too, Rayla. I heard about the battle at the Stormspire and that you were vital in protecting the Queen. Thanks, Jane. She blushed slightly. Callum nodded. As nice as it is to see you, Jane, this isn't a social visit. Oh? We're here to do something very important. He reached over to the bag as Rayla took it off, undoing the latch and showing the contents. The elder Moonshadow gasped as she looked inside. A dragon egg? She looked between the two. I knew you were close, but so soon? It's only been a year. The pair blushed. It's not ours, Callum managed after a moment, looking away. It's my brother. Brother? Jane looked over the egg, then back at the prince. Your mother and father were sky dragons, so why are you here? Shifting a little uncomfortably, Callum tried to find the best way to explain the situation. Well, after my father was killed and I was taken, my mother, she found solace in another dragon, and, well, the Moon Mage was a little shocked by this information, but her expression softened. I see. So, if you are here, I'm assuming the father of this little one is the Moon Dragon. Yes. I see. The prince nodded. I need you to help us hatch him. We know we need a full moon, which is tonight, but I'm worried about the sky blood in him. The mage nodded quickly. Of course, I can prepare some protective spells for him. Thank you. And having you and Rayla here will help, since you are also of sky and moon. Rayla glanced at her dragon with a smile. So, what do we need to do? It's almost night. Of course, follow me. It's best we get in position before the moon reaches its peak. Walking with her, they headed quickly up the stairs to the Nexus, then down the other side into the basin. As they got closer to the water's edge, Rayla suddenly shuddered. Wow, I never got this close before. It's amazing, isn't it? Jane agreed. And on full moons, it's even better. So, what do we do now? You need to take the egg into the water while I prepare the protective spells. Really? The egg needs to be submerged before the moon reaches its peak, the mage explained. Removing his cloak, undershirt, and boots, Callum stepped into the water with only his pants, which he rolled up as high as he could, wanting to keep as much of his clothes dry as possible. Rayla, he asked, reaching out to her with his free hand. With a nod, the elf removed her armor and outer layer of clothing, stepping into the water with him. The pair of them reached out and took the egg together from the bag, walking out until they were waist-deep in the shimmering water. Slowly, the pair half-submerged the egg between them. On the bank, Jane began to chant something, and the ground around her began to glow. Watching her, Rayla glanced up at the moon. Not long now. Then you better hold on. I think your moon presence will help too. As she held tighter, looking at the egg between them, she anxiously looked over at the dragon. Cal, she said softly, do you ever think we'll have an egg? The dragon glanced at her, then thought for a moment, a small smile coming to his lips. Well, I'm sure one day we'll have a little variant of our own, but I don't know if it'll be an egg. When the time comes, I'll have to pay Ginten and his clan a visit, ask some questions. He smiled. Smiling, he reached his hand up, brushing her cheek with his thumb. The water trickled off her cheek, and she smiled. Yeah, one day. She smiled, then kissed his palm. I'm glad I could be here for this, Cal. So am I, he said honestly, looking down at the egg between them. Zim's family, and so are you. Family belongs together. Together, she whispered, feeling subtle pulses beneath the palm of her hand. As the moon began to rise higher and higher, her skin began to fade and darken. Across from her, Callum just stared awestruck, despite seeing it a few times already. Never ceases to amaze me, he said fondly, admiring how her markings and eyes glowed brightly. She smiled and would have blushed if he could see it, but between them the water began to glow as it reflected the moonlight. The egg also began to shimmer. Oh, here we go, Callum chuckled. Held in the water, the egg was kept in full exposure of the moonlight. It wriggled and tumbled in their hold while power coursed through the eggshell and into the little dragon within. Rayla could only watch in amazement, not able to believe that she was witnessing the hatching of a dragon. Yet here she was, overseeing her fiancé's little brother. She looked up for a moment to see Callum as he watched expectantly with a huge grin. His expression was almost childishly giddy. The shaking continued for a bit, making small ripples in the water as it did. It glowed brightly before dimming a little. Fearful, Rayla looked over, but Callum was still smiling, watching the egg before his eyes widened. There, he whispered, looking at a small crack. He wasn't willing to take his hands away to point. Looking closer, Rayla spied a black crack in the shell, and as she watched, it spread out and cut the shell in half. Before she could ask what was happening, it burst out in a flash of moonlight. Then the light vanished, 4 bits of shell floating on the water in the middle, and in the middle was half the shell. Sitting in the middle of the shell was a small, dark blue dragon. It yawned as if just waking from a dream and shook its head before looking up at the pair, grinning with a tongue hanging out as his tail wagged happily. Rayla gave a shocked laugh as she looked at Callum. He's adorable. Yep, he said proudly. The dragon gave a bark as he carefully stepped to the edge of his shell boat and looked at the water. The dragon backed off, whimpering. Don't worry, we'll get you to shore, Callum promised. Rayla, you take him. I'm going to collect the shell. Nodding, Rayla picked up the dragonling and cuddled him close to her chest, walking over to the moon mage who had been watching anxiously. Is he all right? She asked when they got closer. Looks healthy to me, Rayla chuckled as the dragon chewed on a bit of her loose hair. Callum waded through the water after them, with all the broken shell pieces in his hand. Climbing onto the shore, he set the pieces down before approaching the 2 moon shadow elves. How is he doing? Great! I'd even say he's quite energetic, Rayla laughed as the dragonling shimmied in her arms. May I? The prince held out his arms, a hopeful look in his eyes. Rayla chuckled, passing the baby over to him. Of course, he's your brother. The small dragon snuggled closer to his elder brother, nuzzling under his chin and licking his cheek. Callum only laughed, tears in his eyes, as he snuggled his younger sibling. The little one yipped and made some odd sounds for a bit. Oddly, Callum nodded. Yep, that's me. Big brother. Rayla blinked. You You understand him? Of course, all dragons are born able to speak, he explained as Zim climbed out of his arms and up over his shoulder. He climbed onto his head and using him as a perch to look around. Rayla laughed as she reached up and scratched the dragonling under his chin. It seems you made yourself at home between your big brother's horns, A yip and a purr was her reply. Callum smiled, trying not to move his head as he looked over at Lee Jane. Lee Jane, I want you to have part of the shell. Your Highness, she gasped. I couldn't accept such a precious gift. The shell of an archdragon is a powerful conduit for magic. You will have a use for it, he added, nodding to it by his feet. Consider it a thanks for helping hatch him safely and for teaching me how to shift the last time I was here. She looked hesitant, but then snorted, covering her mouth with a smile. I'm sorry. I can't take you seriously with the youngling on your head. As if forgetting he was there, Callum looked up just as Zim looked down, tongue still lowering out of his mouth. Rayla chuckled, stepping over and picking Zim up off his head and holding him close to her chest. Well, since Zim here is all right, it's getting late. Yes, I agree, Callum said, picking up his clothes and the bits of shell. It was a long flight, and I'm exhausted. You're more than welcome to stay once more, Your Highness. Back in the same gazebo from their previous visit, the pair changed out of their wet clothes and into the dry ones Rayla had packed for both of them. Once dry and dressed, they climbed into bed, Callum yawning as he held his arms out for Rayla to curl up at his side. But then suddenly he felt something stinging in his tail. Rolling over, he looked to see his new half-brother biting it with a clear frown. He yipped and growled slightly before climbing up the tail and into the bed. Rayla sighed as he trotted up between them. Sorry, Zim, she whispered, stroking the back of his head with a yawn. I was so tired I forgot about you. He frowned at her, then licked her cheek. He spun around on the spot, flopping himself down between the pair. Callum chuckled as he looked between his brother and fiancé. I don't think we're going to be cuddling tonight. Yeah, there's a little bit of a dragon between us. He smiled, kissed his fingers, and reached over, placing them on her lips. Night, Rayla. Night, Callum. Catamondius, you're back, Zuiva smiled as she watched her son land, spreading his wings so Rayla could slide off. How was your trip? Well, Rayla and I liked it, he hummed, shifting to his hybrid form. But your other son wasn't so fond when he saw how high we were. Rayla chuckled as she opened the bag on her back and let the small dragon jump out from inside. The queen covered her mouth as she looked down at the hatchling. She knelt and picked him up quickly, leaning in and nuzzling his cheek as he returned the gesture. Edmondius, it's so good to finally meet you. As he yipped and snuggled closer to his mother, Callum smiled, wrapping his arm around Rayla's waist and kissing her brow fondly. Maybe someday, he whispered.